The new girl got everything, and it destroyed the whole office. A story about favoritism, fairness, and the quiet war inside an office. When 24-year-old Vanessa Cross walked into Whitmore and Bell for the first time, every head in the office turned. Not because she was loud, not because she dressed to be looked at. It was simply that she was the kind of woman people noticed whether they meant to or not. She was tall, with glossy dark hair, and the kind of cheekbones that photographed well in a profession that rarely photographed anyone. Her smile was calm. Her handshake was firm and brief. She carried herself with a composure that did not belong to someone 3 weeks out of law school. And that contradiction was the first thing anyone felt about her, before they had even learned her name. Whitmore and Bell was not a place where surprises happened. The firm had occupied the same 3 floors of the same downtown Chicago tower for 40 years. The carpet was the color of old coffee. The conference room still had a wall clock that ran 4 minutes slow, and no one had ever fixed it because everyone had simply learned to add 4 minutes. Most of the staff had been there more than a decade. It was family-owned, conservative, and built on routines so old they had hardened into something close to law themselves. The founding partner, Richard Whitmore, was 61 and still ran the firm the way a man runs something he is afraid to outlive. He remembered which associates took cream in their coffee. He was generous in the small ways and merciless in the large ones. And after 40 years, no one could quite tell where the line between the two would fall on any given morning. His daughter, Caroline Whitmore, had spent 15 years climbing toward the partnership everyone assumed would one day be hers. She was not flashy. She was plain-faced, deliberate, and frighteningly intelligent in the way of people who have decided that being underestimated is a tactical advantage. She knew every client, every loophole, every employee's birthday, and every structural weakness in the building, including the 4-minute clock. She had earned her place the slow way, the only way she trusted, by being undeniable. Vanessa changed the weather of the office in less than a week. Richard introduced her to every department himself. This was the detail people fixed on later, when they tried to explain to themselves when exactly things had begun to go wrong. He never did that. Onboarding was HR's job, and Richard treated HR the way he treated the weather, as something that happened to him without his involvement. But with Vanessa he walked the floor personally, hand hovering near her shoulder, introducing her with the warmth of a proud uncle, showing off a niece who had finally come home. He lingered at her desk. He asked her opinion in meetings, then repeated her answers back to the room, as though they were his own discoveries. Within her first month, he assigned her directly to 2 high-profile cases, the kind that associates usually waited years to touch, and then only touched the edges of. At first, people gave it the most generous reading they could find. "She's young and energetic," they told each other in the elevator. "She reminds him of someone, maybe. She's probably just talented. Give it time." The office wanted to believe in talent. Believing in talent was easier than believing in the alternative. Then the small things began to accumulate, and small things accumulated stopped being small. Vanessa was given a corner office with 2 windows, while associates who had been at the firm 6 and 7 years still typed in cubicles under fluorescent tubes that hummed. She was invited to private client dinners, the ones with the good wine and the unspoken understanding that careers were made at them. Her mistakes had a way of disappearing before anyone but her had seen them. When a 3rd year named Dell missed a filing deadline by a single afternoon, Richard dressed him down in front of the entire litigation group, slow and surgical, until the man's ears went red and he stared at the table. 2 weeks later, Vanessa sent a confidential strategy memo to the wrong internal distribution list, copying 9 people who should never have seen it. Richard laughed, waved his hand, and called it part of learning. The room learned something that day, but it was not the lesson he intended to teach. They always notice first. They have to. Melissa, from litigation, noticed most of all. Melissa had given 9 years to Whitmore and Bell. She had stayed past midnight more times than she could count. She had worked through a Christmas, 2 Thanksgivings, and the week her sister got married, calling in her toast from a hotel business center between drafts of a brief. She had asked 3 separate times across 3 separate years to sit in on senior client strategy meetings. And 3 times she had been told the timing wasn't right. Vanessa was in those meetings within 4 months. No one had told Melissa the timing was right. The timing had simply, for Vanessa, never been a question. The resentment started the way resentment usually does, not as a flame, but as a temperature. Conversations died a half-second early when Vanessa walked into the break room. People forgot, with suspicious consistency, to copy her on emails she needed. A case file vanished from her desk one morning and reappeared 3 hours later as though it had never left. One afternoon, someone poured cold coffee into the ficus beside her chair, and the plant browned and dropped its leaves over the following week, like a small, slow accusation. Vanessa saw all of it. She was not stupid. Her composure had never been the composure of someone who didn't notice. She simply never complained. She arrived early, left late, and absorbed each slight without ever giving anyone the satisfaction of a reaction. And that somehow made them hate her more. Because a person who refuses to bleed makes you feel like the one who is bleeding. Caroline watched all of it without saying a word. Unlike the others, she was not, at first, emotional about it. She had trained herself out of that years ago, in the same way she had trained herself out of needing to be liked. She studied patterns, because patterns were where the truth hid in plain sight, and the pattern here was not subtle once you decided to look at it honestly. Richard favored Vanessa in ways that made no business sense. He praised her reflexively before she had finished speaking. He defended her instantly before anyone had finished accusing. He protected her with a fierceness that belonged to a much older relationship than the one between a senior partner and a first-year hire. The gossip turned vicious, the way gossip does when no one can find the real explanation, and so everyone manufactures a worse one. Some decided Richard was sleeping with her. Others decided Vanessa was manipulating him, working some long con they couldn't quite diagram. A few simply concluded that an old man had seen youth and a pretty face and lost the judgment that had carried him for 4 decades. None of them were entirely right. The truth was stranger and sadder than any of the theories, and it was a truth Richard himself could barely look at directly. Vanessa reminded Richard of his late wife, not in any way you could photograph. Not the face, not exactly. It was in the smaller things, the things that survive a person and then ambush you in a stranger. The same low, dry humor. The same habit of tilting her head a few degrees when she listened, as though the words were arriving from slightly to the left. The same way of going quiet before saying something that turned out to matter. Eleanor had been dead for 6 years. Richard had buried her on a gray Tuesday and gone back to work on the Thursday because work was the only room in his life that did not have her absence sitting in it. And then a 24-year-old had walked through his door with a stranger's face and his wife's mannerisms, and something in him that he had spent 6 years sealing shut had quietly come unlatched. He did not understand it himself. He would not have called it what it was if you had paid him. He only knew that the office felt warmer when she was in it, that her presence cost him nothing and gave him back something he thought he'd lost, and that he was the boss, so no one could stop him. Grief is a poor manager. It does not show up on any org chart, and it answers to no one. One evening, Caroline stayed late, reviewing a stack of contracts, and heard laughter coming from her father's office. Vanessa was inside. The door stood a few inches open, and through the gap, Caroline could see her father leaning back in his chair, relaxed in a way she had not seen him relaxed in years. telling some story about the firm's early days, the leaking ceiling, and the borrowed desk, and the first client who paid in installments. Vanessa was listening with that head tilt. Then Richard said something that made Caroline stop where she stood, a folder half raised in her hand. "You have instincts most lawyers don't develop in 20 years. Caroline did not move. She stood in the dim hallway outside the partial light of her father's office and waited for the rest of it, for the qualifier, for the joke. None came. He had meant it plainly. He had said it to a stranger who had been there 4 months, and in 15 years, through every late night and every one case and every birthday she had remembered when he forgot, he had never once said anything within a country mile of it to her. She walked away quietly, but something shifted in her that night and did not shift back. The way a wall that has held for years develops, in a single bad season, a crack that will not close. After that, the quiet clashes became something closer to war. Caroline began testing Vanessa in meetings. She asked her questions that had no clean answer, then waited. She interrupted her presentations to correct details that did not need correcting. She did it coolly, professionally, with a smile that could have meant anything, which was worse than if it had meant something. Vanessa handled most of it. She was quicker than Caroline had expected and steadier under pressure than someone her age had any right to be. But pressure that does not stop is a different thing from pressure that comes and goes, and over the weeks, it began to wear at her edges. She started double-checking work she already knew was right. She started speaking a half-beat slower, bracing. Then, in a client conference on a Thursday afternoon, she cited a case that had been overturned 18 months earlier. It was a small error, the kind anyone makes when they are tired and watched. Caroline did not let it pass. "Maybe," she said evenly, to the room more than to Vanessa, "we should let someone with more experience handle this account." The conference room went silent. Vanessa's face colored. The client looked at the table, and Richard, who had been quiet for most of the meeting, leaned forward. "Everyone makes mistakes," he said. Caroline looked at him directly, holding his eyes for a beat longer than was comfortable. "Some people," she said, "are allowed to." The sentence hung in the air like something spilled. Richard ended the meeting early. He confronted her afterward, in his office, with the door fully shut for once. "You're acting unprofessional," he said. Caroline laughed, a short, bitter sound with no humor in it. "Unprofessional. You handed a first-year authority over people who built this firm, and I'm the one who's unprofessional." She earned it. "No." Caroline's voice did not rise, it sharpened. "She impressed you. There's a difference, and you used to know it." Richard's face hardened into the expression that had ended 100 negotiations. "You're jealous." She stared at him as though he had spoken in a language she had stopped understanding. "Jealous, Dad. She's underqualified. I'm not jealous of her. I'm afraid of what you've become while looking at her. She has potential, and that matters more to you now than 15 years." She did not phrase it as a question, because it wasn't one. He ended the conversation there, the way he ended everything he could not win, by declaring it over. But the damage had already been done, and father and daughter barely spoke for the better part of a week, passing each other in the hallways with the polite blankness of strangers who happened to share an elevator. Vanessa, meanwhile, was disappearing into a loneliness she could not name out loud. She heard the whispers when she passed the paralegal's bay. One of them asked her, with a sweetness sharp enough to draw blood, whether she had any special qualifications that got her promoted so fast. An associate she had never wronged muttered "favorite child" under his breath, just loud enough as she walked by. She began eating lunch alone at her desk, the corner office that everyone resented, becoming the only room in the building where no one looked at her like that. She had wanted when she took the job only to be good at it. She had not asked to be Richard's favorite. She did not know what she reminded him of, and she would not have wanted the burden of it if she had. She had walked into a 40-year-old machine, and through no plan of her own, become the grain of sand in it. And the machine had decided she was the problem, rather than examine the hand that had placed her there. 2 days before a major trial, the master file for the firm's biggest active client disappeared. Months of preparation, strategy memos, confidential witness statements that could not be reconstructed in 48 hours or 400. Panic moved through the floors like a dropped current. People searched their desks, the conference rooms, the printer trays, the cars in the garage. Richard's voice came through his office door in a register no one had heard from him in years. And then the file turned up, in the cabinet of Vanessa Cross's corner office, behind a row of binders, as though someone had wanted it found, but not too easily. The temperature of the office changed in a single breath. Melissa smirked, openly, not bothering to hide it. People traded looks down the hallway that said everything they had wanted to say for months. Caroline said nothing at all, and her silence was the coldest thing in the room. Richard demanded an explanation. Vanessa looked, for the first time since she had arrived, genuinely undone. "I didn't put that there," she said. "I have never opened that cabinet." But the evidence was ugly, and ugly evidence does not wait for context. Security footage showed her entering the records room late the previous evening. What the footage did not show clearly was what she had carried out, or whether she had carried out anything at all. It didn't matter. The office had wanted a story for months, and now it had one, and a story that confirms what people already feel is almost impossible to kill. Some decided she had stolen the file to sabotage the coworkers who hated her. Others decided she was simply careless, an empty suit Richard had inflated, finally collapsing under the weight of work she was never qualified to hold. And for the first time, Richard did not leap to her defense in front of everyone. He hesitated. It lasted only a moment, but Vanessa saw it, and the hesitation hurt her more than any accusation in the room, because it was the one thing she had counted on without knowing she counted on it. An internal investigation began. HR interviews behind closed doors, email audits, badge swipe logs printed and spread across the conference table like cards. The office curdled. Employees took sides, some loudly, most in the quiet currency of who they sat with at lunch and who they stopped greeting in the hall. A camp formed that wanted Vanessa gone by Friday. A quieter camp, smaller and more uneasy, had begun to feel that the firm itself had become something cruel, that the rot was not a person, but a climate, and that they were all breathing it. Caroline kept her distance from the investigation. She told herself it was not her place. But the lawyer in her, the part that had spent 15 years learning to distrust the obvious answer precisely because it was obvious, would not leave it alone. Vanessa did not strike her as reckless. Manipulative, maybe she had been willing to believe that for months, but reckless was a different animal, and the woman who double-checked work she already knew was right did not hide a master file in her own cabinet 2 days before trying. It was too stupid. It was stupid in a way that pointed away from Vanessa rather than toward her. 3 nights later, Caroline stayed late again, and as she crossed the darkened floor, she saw Melissa come out of the archive room and stop short at the sight of her. Melissa recovered fast. She always did, but not fast enough. And the expression Caroline caught in the half-second before the recovery was not the face of a woman who belonged where she was standing. It was the face of someone who had been counting on being alone. Caroline said goodnight, pleasant and unhurried, and went home, and did not sleep. The next morning she did the thing the investigation had not bothered to do. She requested the overnight footage, not from the office hallways everyone had already reviewed, but from the building's exterior cameras and the after-hours corridor by the records room, the cameras that belonged to building security rather than the firm. It took her most of the afternoon. And then there it was, in grainy time-stamped gray. Melissa, the evening before the files surfaced, letting herself into Vanessa's corner office with a spare administrative key, staying 90 seconds, and leaving with her hands empty, in a way that meant they had not been empty going in. Caroline sat in front of the screen for a long time without moving. She could have deleted it. She understood, watching the loop a fourth time, that a part of her wanted to. Exposing the truth meant clearing Vanessa, and clearing Vanessa meant handing her father back, the woman he should never have favored, restoring the very thing Caroline had spent months grinding against. There was a version of the next 10 minutes in which she simply closed the file and let the firm believe what it wanted to believe, and no one would ever have known the difference. But she was not built that way, and she knew it. And somewhere underneath the resentment, she was even a little proud of it. The lawyer she had made herself into, the one who would run this firm someday, could not unsee what she had seen. Whatever Vanessa was, she had not done this. And letting an innocent person take the fall for a thing she did not do was a different kind of corruption from the one Caroline had been fighting, and not a smaller one. At the emergency staff meeting the following afternoon, Richard prepared to announce Vanessa's suspension pending the outcome of the review. Vanessa sat at the far end of the long conference table, pale, hollowed out, her hands folded too carefully in front of her. She had stopped defending herself out loud days ago. There is a point past which defending yourself only makes you look more like the thing they've decided you are, and she had reached it. Richard had gotten 3 sentences in when Caroline spoke. "I found something." Every head turned. She connected her laptop to the wall screen without waiting for permission, and the grainy footage filled the room. The timestamp, the corridor, the spare key, Melissa letting herself in. Melissa's face went the color of paper. No one spoke. The silence stretched until it was its own kind of sound. The wall clock 4 minutes slow, ticking into a room that had stopped breathing. "Why?" Richard finally said. It came out not as a demand, but as something smaller, almost a plea. And Melissa, who had held herself together through 9 years and 1,000 swallowed slights, came apart all at once. "Because she walked in here," she said, her voice shaking, rising, "and got everything, in 4 months, everything I asked for years, and got told the timing wasn't right. She skipped past all of us like we were furniture." She turned and she pointed, not at Vanessa, but at Richard. "You did this. You treated her like she mattered more than every person who built this place. I didn't make her your favorite. You did. I just couldn't stand watching it anymore." No one defended what she had done. It was indefensible, and she would be gone within the hour. But as the words landed, not one person in that room could fully deny them either. Because the worst part of what she said was the part that was true. Melissa was terminated that day. The story leaked to clients and staff anyway, the way these stories always do, sanded down and reshaped in every retelling, until it bore only a passing resemblance to the truth. 2 senior associates resigned within the month, citing other opportunities in the bland language people use, when the real reason is that they no longer believe in the place. Morale, which had been low, found a new floor. And Richard, slowly, began to see the thing he had spent the better part of a year refusing to see. The favoritism had poisoned the firm. Not because Vanessa was evil, she wasn't. Not because the staff were simply small and jealous, though some of them were, but because unequal treatment is a solvent, and it dissolves the one thing an office cannot function without. People will endure a brutal boss, punishing hours, impossible clients, and thankless work. What they will not endure, what quietly ends them, is the belief that the rules are different for the person standing next to them. The moment fairness dies, the floor goes out from under everyone at once, and no one ever feels it fall until they are already standing on nothing. A week later, Richard asked Caroline to meet him privately. When she came in, she was struck by how old he suddenly looked. Not tired, old in a way she had never let herself register, as though the year had finally caught up to him all at once. "I failed this office," he said quietly. Caroline did not answer right away. She had rehearsed a dozen cruel and accurate things over the months, and now that the moment had come, she found she didn't want any of them. "You stopped seeing people equally," she said finally. He nodded, looking at his hands. "I thought I was rewarding talent." "You were rewarding comfort," she said. "She reminded you of something you missed. I understand that better than you think. But you ran a firm on it, and the firm doesn't get to be your grief." It hit him harder than anger would have, because anger he could have argued with. He had no argument for this. He only sat there, an old man in a corner office, nodding at the truth a few years too late. Several days later, Vanessa submitted her resignation. Richard tried to talk her out of it. He offered her things, more cases, a title, the partnership track years ahead of schedule, and every offer only confirmed for her why she had to go. Because every offer was the disease wearing the costume of the cure. "I never wanted to be the center of this place," she told him, gently, and meant it. On her last day, Caroline walked her to the elevator. Neither of them spoke at first. They had spent months as something close to enemies, and there was no clean word for what they were now. "You hated me," Vanessa said, watching the floor numbers. "Before you even knew me." Caroline exhaled slowly. "You represented something." "What?" Caroline glanced back down the hall toward her father's office. "The proof that working hard doesn't always matter as much as everyone tells you it does. That sometimes the door just opens for someone, for no reason they can control, and the rest of us are left standing in the hall, wondering what we did wrong. I needed you to be the villain. It was easier than being angry at him." "I worked hard too," Vanessa said. "I didn't ask for the door to open. I just walked through it because it was open." "I know," Caroline said, and was a little surprised to find that she did. "That was always the part I couldn't forgive. It would have been so much easier if you'd deserved it less." The elevator opened. Vanessa stepped in and turned around. For a moment, the two women simply looked at each other across the closing distance. "You should have had a fair chance here," Caroline said. Vanessa gave a small, tired smile. "So should you." Then the doors closed, and she was gone, and the hallway was quiet in the way of a place after the loudest thing in it has finally left. Whitmore and Bell survived the scandal. It did not recover the culture it lost. Not really. Some things, once dissolved, do not reconstitute. But it survived, which is its own kind of verdict. Richard stepped back from daily management within the year. He kept an office, came in 3 days a week, and was, by all accounts, gentler than he had ever been, the way men sometimes become gentle only after the thing that made them hard has finally broken. Caroline took control of the firm she had always been meant to inherit, though she inherited it on terms no one would have chosen. One of the first things she did was build a transparent promotion structure, advancement decisions reviewed by a committee, criteria written down where everyone could read them, no more private fast tracks, and no more unexplained ascents, no more favorites. People who knew the story assumed she did it out of bitterness, a daughter legislating against her father's worst year. It was not bitterness. It was the one lesson the whole ruinous year had finally taught her, paid for in resignations and reputations, and a woman who deserved better, walking into an elevator and never coming back. People can survive almost anything an office throws at them. The only thing they cannot survive is the belief that fairness is dead. Once that belief sets in, the foundation begins to go, silently, under everyone, and by the time anyone hears it crack, there is nothing left underneath to save. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, please follow the page. We're a new channel trying to reach more listeners like you, and your support truly helps us grow and continue sharing stories that matter. Don't forget to like and leave a comment. And if you have a story of your own you'd like to share, send it in. Our email is in the pinned comment and description below.